Okay, we're live.
We're live?
We're live.
Well, hello, I'm Richard Dolan, and I'm very happy to be with you. This is the first official episode of, first official installment of Intelligent Disclosure, which is a series that I am creating here. This is going to be regular live YouTube chats with you, uh, running basically from anywhere from 40, 45 minutes to however long we decide to go if there's good reason to keep going or not. But I'm looking at 45 minutes, up to 60 tops, and we'll see how that goes. Actually, Tracy and I have been traveling. I'm not in Rochester, New York. We are on the opposite side of North America in British Columbia of Canada, in the town of Whistler. And I would show you what it looks like outside, but you just feel jealous. So let's just do our work right here. We're in a hotel room, and I think we're set up. But it is actually just beautiful in Whistler, and what a lovely place. Very happy to be here. I'm hoping that the video and audio are good, and I think we're just going to keep going. If there's a problem, Tracy's going to let me know. The other bit of introduction I just want to give before I launch into some of the things I want to talk about is to let you know who else is providing invaluable support for this series, and they are Lori and Michael Moriarty, and Lori's running all the chat. So if there's a question that you have in the YouTube chat, Lori's going to be moderating that, and Michael handles really all of the technical support that is necessary to allow this presentation to happen. So, and Tracy's right across from me, and maybe you'll get to see her before we're done. But she's in touch with them. They communicate with her, and she'll tell me anything that I need to know.
Hi, everybody.
There's Tracy. Good. So one thing I wanted to just start off, I've got a number of questions from members of the Richard Dolan members website, and I've got all of those here, and I will get into all of those in just one moment. The thing I wanted to introduce first is simply a theme that I was hitting on in the lecture that I just gave for what was called Architects of the New Paradigm, that was given here in Vancouver. And that was a full lecture on a lot of the damaging effects of UFO secrecy on our society. But one of the sub themes that I just want to talk about here, because I think it's got great staying power, and it's going to stay with us in the years to come, which is how the idea of UFO disclosure is not really going to, it's not likely to come to us on its own as a sole single issue without a lot of other issues merging in with it in terms of importance in our world. So what am I thinking of? For years and years, UFO disclosure advocates, including myself, have been arguing we need UFO disclosure because it's incredibly important. It's perhaps the most important issue of our time that doesn't get much discussion. And it is an important issue. The fact that there are these other beings that have been interacting with humanity for a very long time and that have had an effect on human society, this is very important indeed. And the coming out of that reality will have revolutionary implications for our world. All of that is true. But it's also true, in all likelihood, that a UFO disclosure is not going to be affecting us in isolation of other key revolutionary issues that are affecting us right now. So I'm thinking of advanced artificial intelligence. And, when people tell me that UFOs are a far out topic, I always like to reply, read some good pieces on the future of AI, because that's really far out. And if we assume that there's going to be an end of UFO secrecy within, let's say, 20 years from now. So we're in 2018, so we'll assume that the end of UFO secrecy might occur by the end of the 2030s, let's just say. Some people believe it sooner, but some people have always believed it sooner, but let's just say 20 years. Well, if you look at what is likely to be in the works in terms of AI within 20 years, we're at a point where our civilization will be revolutionized by that alone, simply by the advent of advanced artificial intelligence, where you will have a laptop or a personal computer that will very likely have an effective intelligence greater than that of a human being. So that, in other words, though your computer may not be conscious the way that you and I are conscious, but it may be conscious in a different way, and it will have an intelligence that will seem, very possibly, to have a perhaps even higher consciousness than our own in some ways. This is what a lot of AI theorists believe. So that fact alone will revolutionize our world. And then, there's a lot of other key factors that will be on the table within 20 years. Economic experts talk about the coming robo-apocalypse. What's that? Well, that's the Terminator coming not to kill you, but to take your job away. And increasingly, we're looking at a future in which it's more and more difficult to envision how every person on this planet is going to be gainfully employed. And what's that world going to be like? How will that change the political dynamics, the political landscape? So the world that we're looking at in the coming 20 years is going to be affected by a lot of other things than simply the end of UFO secrecy. Having said that, I think that the end of UFO secrecy will have a very, very great revolutionary impact on our society. UFO secrecy has been one of the key drivers of the black budget world that it dominates us in so many ways and never gets discussed. Go back to the 1940s and you can recognize, yes, the Manhattan Project, that is the development of the atomic bomb, was a key initiator of this great world of secrecy. But also think about the early UFO phenomenon as it landed into the laps, particularly of the American national security elite in the late 1940s. And we can see how that secrecy became paramount in their handling of the problem. And how, particularly if you factor in crash retrievals and acquired exotic technology, keeping that secret is very, very critical. And so that created this culture of secrecy. And that included the spending of billions of dollars off the grid, as it were, away from prying congressional eyes. And that's an end run around the U.S. Constitution, if you're looking at the American side of it. And so UFO secrecy has created a culture of illegality that the deeper and farther down this road we go, the deeper the problems are. And on top of that, UFO secrecy has created a schism in our world between those who are in the know and those who are not in the know. And those who are in the know have access to technology and science and cosmology that's absolutely revolutionary, that the rest of us are not officially able to have access to. Now, what many of us have been doing, of course, all these years is studying it anyway, and we know we're onto something important, and we don't necessarily need confirmation from the government to know that we're on the right path. But the fact that there is no confirmation from governments is a problem for us. Think about being in the world of academia and wanting to study the UFO phenomenon. You really can't do it. And you can't do it because there's no official sanction from what I've often called official culture or establishment culture. And because there's no sanction in the world of academia, good luck trying to delve into it without losing your job or reputation. It's very difficult. And this goes for most of the media, certainly all of the political world, so that the study of this most important subject has been stifled right out of the gate. So the ending of that secrecy, or as my friend and colleague Steve Bassett has often called it, ending of that truth embargo, it's a good word, will open up a kind of intellectual revolution in our civilization, in our society. And it's one that we really need. As I look at this, the end of this secrecy is a kind of opening up of the floodgates, as it were. In other words, people will want to know answers to myriad questions about UFOs. That will happen. Questions like, who are we? What are we dealing with? Are they friend or foe? How many of them are there? will we even get answers to that is another question. Then there'll be questions about the technology. How revolutionary is this technology? Are there answers to energy? Are there answers to propulsion? These are obvious questions to ask, and I suspect that there will be immediate, or at least, if not immediate answers down the road soon. And then there's questions about even more fringy science. In other words, it's very clear to me that there have been some individuals within the intelligence community who have better answers, not perfect answers, but better answers to some of the scientific questions about UFOs, including space and time. And I cannot confirm this, but there have been indication after indication to me that it's understood that these other beings operate in ways that are radically different from our official conventional science that most of us encounter. So there's a lot of these intellectual questions that come up. But on top of that, there'll be other kinds of questions. Once political authorities break the news of this to the public, there will be a lot of repercussions politically in our world. In the United States, we had Watergate many, many years ago. We had Vietnam many, many years ago. These were events that really broke public trust in political institutions in a way that really America has never recovered from, and I think much of the world has not recovered from. And similarly, the potential is there for the same thing with the end of UFO secrecy, especially depending on how it comes out. So if the secret comes out by accident, if it's leaked out, then all hell is going to break loose. And the political institutions are going to be asked a lot of other questions like, you lied about UFOs for 70 plus years. What about 9/11? What about chemtrails? What about underground bases? What about, my goodness, even the JFK assassination? That's important. That's not trivial, even though it's so many years before. So all of these questions will come out, and who knows where that will stop. Your guess is as good as mine on that matter. The questions will just snowball, and it'll become an avalanche. And once that whole door is open, nobody knows. So that's the disclosure process. That's why it's revolutionary. And for that reason, it seems to me, and this is allowing me to segue into at least some of the questions that I know are coming up. For those people who have this information and who are responsible and wanting to begin a process of rolling out the truth of UFOs. In other words, if there's a disclosure process that is planned by those elites who've got this information, how might they want to do it? Well, if I were one of those individuals, I would want to do this as responsibly and as peacefully as possible. And I'm sure that they have an additional motivation of wanting to, once they unleash this wild horse of disclosure, they want to find a way to keep riding it so that they don't get thrown off. In other words, they want to find a way to retain their position in the political and economic and financial hierarchy, because it's a nice position for them to be in. And having access to the wealth and power and this information, they'll want to retain that. The problem is during revolutionary periods of time, and disclosure will be absolutely revolutionary, it's really unclear if they'll be able to hang on to that. So that's their problem. And so by going through a process of disclosure, it seems to me the only reasonable process for them is to roll this out bit by bit and hope to retain as much control over the narrative as they possibly can retain. And this is as good a time as any to move into some of the questions that members of the Richard Dolan members site chimed in before I started this. And I know there's some other questions rolling up on the YouTube chat, and I think Tracy will give those to me in a minute. But this is one that I want to ask first, and it's from our member Blake. And Blake asks, how would you handle a TTSA type opportunity differently than Tom DeLonge? And what would you do now if you were in their position, assuming face value motivations? That's a good qualification. Assuming face value. So assuming that everything that they're doing is above board, they're trying to disclose genuine information about UFOs. We're talking about To the Stars Academy, run by Tom DeLonge of Blink 182. And most of you following the UFO subject kind of know about this. And if you don't know, it's too much for me to catch you up on right now. There's a lot you can read about. How would I do this? Would I do this any differently? All right, first thing I would say is it's really hard to be a Monday morning quarterback to someone else's operation. It's very easy to want to be a Monday morning quarterback, but it's also very unfair because for those guys, they're putting themselves out there. We can critique mistakes that people make, but when you're in the situation, and I'm not in their situation, but I've been in situations where I'm in public and you have to make decisions, and sometimes they're good decisions and sometimes they're not good decisions. And when you make a bad decision, you just go, why did I do that? That's life. Having said all of that, we have a number of questions we could ask. Would you work with John Podesta and want to work with Hillary Clinton, as Tom DeLonge did back in 2014, 2015, and 2016? Would you want to do that? That's a question. Would you want to connect with generals and the CIA, as he has done? These are big questions to ask. So let me just start with those. I don't know if I would be working or would have chosen to work with John Podesta. I will just state that I've felt for many years the UFO research community has had a kind of an undue love affair with John Podesta that really was not warranted. Now, John Podesta, it is true. Look, during the Bill Clinton administration, presidency of Bill Clinton, he was Bill Clinton's chief of staff for quite some time and was well known as a fan of the X-Files, well known as someone who was interested in UFOs. So yes, I get that. After Clinton left the White House, John Podesta gave a pretty well-known press conference back in 2002 where he stated the importance of coming out with genuine information on UFOs. So yes, he was and remains an important person politically, and he talked about the need for disclosure. Having said all of that, I always found it a bit distressing, to be honest with you, about how many UFO researchers look to John Podesta as this, almost like a savior for the UFO community. Like, we need his benediction to push this field out into the public mainstream. But the reality is that John Podesta did little bits here and there over the years, but really not a whole lot. All right. On top of that, it's a fact that when you work closely with a family like the Clintons, it's as if you're working closely with a family like the Bushes, because the Clintons and the Bushes are like this, very close, like this. Bill Clinton and George Bush Sr. go back, way back. And in fact, if you watch the recent Tom Cruise movie, American Made, you will see they go back into Arkansas in the 1980s when CIA pilots like Barry Seal were delivering drugs and weapons with the CIA, and Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas, knew all about that operation. It made him very close to George Bush Sr. These are crime families. And so when you're a political operative working at the highest level for one of America's top crime families, and I consider the Clintons and Bushes at basically equal level there, you've got to really wonder, what is this person's true motivation? Is there really a motivation here for the public good to reveal UFO disclosure? Well, I've just never been on board with that idea. I've never been convinced that this is what's going on. And I have believed, and I continue to believe, that the promotion of the UFO subject through Podesta and Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 was primarily an attempt to garner a vote that they had been afraid to go after before, and yes, the UFO vote. And people laugh. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago on my Richard Dolan show with Peter Levenda, and I have only respect and admiration for Peter Levenda. Peter is somewhat close to Tom DeLonge. They co-authored a book together. And Peter didn't really think that that was a credible thing. He says, what, they're going to go after the UFO vote? And I said, yes, I think that's exactly what they're trying to do. 2016 is not the same as 2008. And the UFO vote, you can go after it in 2016 and not get railroaded by the media, particularly if you're working for Hillary Clinton. The New York Times would not touch her in terms of the UFO subject. So I think that there was a kind of a political machination involved here, and I think that's what it was. I don't believe that there was a genuine disclosure initiative. Having said that, back to the Tom DeLonge TTSA. You want to work with Podesta? Fine, work with Podesta. You want to work with generals in the CIA? Fine, work with the generals in the CIA. They're not all evil in that community. There are good people in there who do believe in disclosure. The question is, are you getting the right people? So this is what I would do. If I were running this now, and again, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, and I don't know that I would have done a better job than what they did. But one thing you've got to do is, and I've got my notes here, so I'm just going to look at that. You need to provide evidence that is bulletproof. You need to provide evidence that's bulletproof. So no documents without proper headers and footers and attribution. So when things are released, they are properly released. Videos need to be 100% verified. No organizations with confusing name changes. When you're talking about the ATIP program, is it Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program or Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program? There are both of these names that have been put out there by the Pentagon. What is it that we're dealing with? We've got to be clear. These things matter. All right? No sloppy rollouts in your press conference where you put out photos of UFOs that are actually Mylar balloons. And I know it's been beaten to death, and I'm sure they just, every time they hear it, their eyes roll. But these are important, critical mistakes that damage credibility. No interviews with major YouTube hosts in which you come across very poorly. All right? That was a huge mistake. This was the Tom DeLonge interview with Joe Rogan. And look, everyone has a bad day. All right? But the fact is, when you are going out there in the public and you are going to be that face, you have got to be that face. And you've got to do it right. You've got to do it responsibly. So this is not a game. All right, this isn't a party. You have to go out there and you got to do it seriously and do it well and support what you say 1,000%. So I'm not saying they can't do that, because there are good people in that organization, in TTSA. I know one of them. I know Hal Puthoff, and I have respect for him. So I think that there are good people there, and, I don't rule out the possibility that good things can happen. There are many people out there, and I know I hear this all the time, who just think it's a big crock. It's not. It's not legitimate. It's an intelligence disinformation. There's a history of this. There's a history of intelligence community. There's a history of intelligence community manipulation of the UFO community and of the UFO disclosure phenomenon. My buddy Grant Cameron's talked about this. I've talked about this. It's true. It's real. It can happen. Maybe this is one of those instances. But if, just to answer Blake's question, if I were doing it, that's what I would do. No mistakes. Be careful with what you say. Oh, and one other thing. Don't impute motivations to either extraterrestrials or to the military. Don't go down that road. Back in 2001, Stephen Greer's press conference did the same thing. They had opposite motivations. They imputed positive motivations to the ET and pretty much negative motivations to the U.S. military. That's also unnecessary. TTSA does not need to make these types of inferences. Be careful, be conservative. Don't give. There's an entire skeptical, hostile, debunking world out there that's got you in their crosshairs. Don't give them ammunition. Be careful, be credible, get in, get out, get your story out there. So that's what I would say. another question. Do we have anything that you want to jump in with, Tracy?
Let's just stick on that topic for a second with a couple other people's questions. So do you think that these guys disclosure is happening with TTSA and ATIP because they want to move technologies into the white world for reasons of military dominance?
Yeah, I like that question. So this is something that I've talked about in the past too. I'm sure people could hear you, so I won't repeat it. I think this is a real possibility. And I look at people like Robert Bigelow, and I've never met Robert Bigelow, so it's, far be it from me to infer. Here I am just talking about, don't make inferences. But if I'm asked to speculate, it seems to me that it would be a very smart idea to, and this might tie in with Trump's recent announcement to create a U.S. Space Force. Now, all of these might be useful institutional structures that would allow, to white world, as it were, some of the black world technologies, and also make a lot of money off of it. Particularly if you have a contract, an exclusive contract. I imagine that Bigelow might be able to garner some exclusive contracts with the U.S. military, developing some of this technology and white worlding it, as it were. So that's an absolute possibility. In fact, this is what I've sort of gotten this information, at least from one source, that this was a definite motivation. I don't know if it's exactly true, but in other words, the idea that the TTSA's motivations were not really to deal with the UFO research community, people like me, and in fact, they haven't dealt with me at all, but their motivations are to deal with members of Congress, to get their interest, to get funding for projects that would garner a fair amount of defense contracts and also exclusive technology patents and things like that. So that's a real possibility. Don't rule it out. There's all kinds of motivations when you're dealing with something like disclosure. Disclosure is not just some political event. It's political, it's economic, it's financial, it's all of those things. Any other questions you see there, Tracy?
Okay, one more I just want to do on that, and then let me come closer to the mic.
Oh yeah, come a little closer. Why don't you just say hello to people?
Okay.
Just jump in.
Hi everybody.
There's Tracy.
I'm in the background and I'm getting the notification to get in the microphone for you.
So what's the other question?
Okay, just looking for that one. Hang on a second.
And then I'll move on to a couple of other questions that I have here that are
okay.
I think worthwhile. Yeah.
So do you believe that Tom DeLonge is being played by former current government officials as Grant Cameron has suggested? He just did that at the Toronto conference. He made that comparison.
Right.
So could you comment on that? That's from Jim.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a fair question. Is he being played? I don't know. Everyone's got an opinion on this, and I don't really know if I have a hard and fast opinion on this yet. Does that make me slow? I guess. Does that make me cautious, or does that make me smart? I don't know. I'm interested in having this play out. No one here, not me, not Grant, not anyone else, in my opinion, has all the information in front of them. All right. Grant is speculating, and he's free to do so, and he's got good reasons for speculating as he does. I just don't know if he's right. I don't know. Again, I'm going from I haven't spoken with Tom DeLonge about this, so there's that. I'm going off of a long conversation I had with Peter Levenda, who does have some information on this, and I'm willing to respect what Peter has to say about this enough to think that a lot of this is DeLonge's initiative. Now, that doesn't mean that people on the inside don't see an opportunity here. But what is that opportunity? Is it an opportunity for disinformation, or is it an opportunity for disclosure? I will just say that I have spoken to some people on what I think are on the inside who have privately, and I think believably, said to me they believe in disclosure. All right, so there are people in that community who I think want to see the secret come out. I had a conversation with, I don't know if I can mention who this person is. I think I probably can't. But it was an individual who had really excellent access to high-level individuals about 20 years ago, and he doesn't have that access anymore, not to the same extent. But who said to me that he had a conversation with a retired four-star general, retired, and that this four-star general talked to him about how essentially what we call MJ-12 is international, and how it's that is the control group over the UFO secret, and how this group itself was divided in its opinion on what to do about UFO secrecy, to end it or to continue it. And in fact, this general stated that it was the older people who were the ones who believed in disclosure. The younger ones, the younger members, were the hardcore hardliners. And the reason he offered was that the younger group had not made enough money off of exclusive access to the technology. So they were still out there to make money, and they were all about maintaining secrecy. The older guys and the older women wanted to let this out. So what I'm saying is that there are always factions. You know, there's factions. Today there were factions 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. There's always factions among political elites. So I don't know if Tom DeLonge is being played or not. Everyone's being played in one way or another. Everyone. So the real question is, can you, if you're the guy pushing this forward, handle the evidence in a responsible, proper way? Even if I were in that position, I think it's undoubtedly the case that I would be played as well to one extent or another. It's almost impossible not to be. The real question to ask is, how do you move forward with what is in your power? All right? And that's really what it comes down to. So, any other questions before? I want to move on to some others, but if we're on this, if you've got other good ones.
Yeah, we're on this topic, and this is a really good question that I think a lot of people are curious about. Has anyone verified if the To the Stars Academy players are still under government contract or not? It's from Greg.
I don't know the answer to that. It's fascinating.
Good
Everyone
question.
wants to know about TTSA. This is really front row center, isn't it? It's really capturing the imagination of so many of us. Are they under government contract? I suspect the answer is yes to some of them. But what does that actually mean? So I could ask Hal Puthoff, and far be it for me to speak for him, but I assume that he continues to do government research, defense or intelligence community sponsored research. But does that mean that he's therefore bound in every way not to reveal certain types of information? I don't know. This can get kind of complicated. A lot of these people, like Luis Elizondo, is said to be retired, but of course, just because you're retired doesn't mean that you're not bound by secrecy oaths over classified information that you have encountered. So these are really important issues. Like, these guys need, if they care about us, which I don't think they really care about the public, again, they're all about, from what I understand, dealing with Congress or dealing with the mainstream establishment. But if they were to care about their credibility in our eyes, I think, questions like what Greg was asking, this is really key. They would need to come out with this type of information and be transparent about what they're allowed to talk about and what they're not allowed to talk about. So good question.
Okay, we're going to switch, but first I just want to say a big thank you to Diffuse56, Hornby1, Q, and John Stenos for your great super chats. Thank you so much, you guys.
All right, thank you.
Really appreciate it. Okay, so let's totally go in a new direction.
I just want to say one thing here. I like doing this format. There was someone on one of my YouTube videos who recently said he missed the Richard Dolan shows when I would go solo, because I've been interviewing a lot of people lately. So all I just want to say to that person is, this is one new development that people will have moving forward. So I have a feeling like most of these live chats are probably just going to be me talking about whatever's important to me at that particular time and answering questions. So there's always going to be a solo version of me out there. Right now it's video. And who knows, I may do a couple of solo shows on KGRA as well. But this is how it is now. And I'm very happy with this type of system. It's working pretty well. So any other questions you want to put out there?
Yeah, sure. So here's a question from David. Is there any evidence, documentation to support the Serpo exchange program? And what do you know about this? And what are your thoughts on it?
So the Serpo story, I'm sure many listeners are aware of this, surfaced more than a decade ago, quite a while ago. Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy, I believe, were the ones who received the original Serpo documents back then through Project Camelot. And look, no one, all right, no one has been able to verify any of the Serpo story. And what the Serpo story is, just in a nutshell, is like a kind of astronaut exchange program between Earth-based astronauts and extraterrestrial astronauts who live on the planet known as Serpo. That was their name for it, hence the Serpo documents. And if you really want to read up on this, all the Serpo documents are out there. I'm sure they're an easy search. The thing about the Serpo documents is they are very well-written documents. And I'm just going to make this statement. They are exceedingly well-written, well-crafted documents. They're not low level. They're intelligent. And for that reason, they have gotten a lot of attention, or at least they received a lot of attention initially when they came out a little over a decade ago and were subject to huge amounts of debate, argument, and so forth. No one seemed to be able to agree on this. And I think what happens is that as years go by, you don't really hear as much about Serpo, at least discussed by UFO researchers. And I think it's fair to say there's a general consensus of researchers just to stay the hell away from the Serpo documents and consider them some form of a hoax. What I would say is, my feeling about a lot of these disputed documents, whether we're talking Serpo or whether we're talking Majestic documents on the website of Bob and Ryan Wood, majesticdocuments.com, that there could be truth and disinformation mixed in together. I mean, disinformation is not simply the same as lies. If disinformation were only lies, it wouldn't be effective disinformation. It would be not believable because it would be easy to disprove, and therefore you just dismiss the whole thing. So disinformation is most effective when you have truth woven into the information. And that makes it a lot more complicated. So when some researchers will just say, just throw out all the Majestic documents, throw out the Serpo story, I have this feeling that they're being very premature and that it's not completely wise to do so. That it doesn't mean that we treat these disputed documents as completely valid. Unfortunately, what it means is that there's a lot of gray area here. And it may be very difficult, frankly, to sift through the truth from the untruth. And so relating to the Serpo story, there's two things about the Serpo story that have given me pause. One was my knowledge of one very, very prominent intelligence community insider who gave me reason to believe that he strongly credited the fundamentals of that story. And the impression that I have gotten is that there are others on the inside who believe in the fundamental truth of Serpo. But that's just hint and rumor and innuendo. And I can't confirm any of that. And then the other was a story that I got personally from Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy years ago about their own interaction and investigation of Serpo when it was happening back in those days. And their adamant statement to me that they were under genuine surveillance during that. And I remember sitting down with them back then at a long lunch, and they told me some interesting details about that. And I believe them. And I believe that they were under a very odd type of surveillance. So there may be something to this, but again, what is that something? And I don't know if I'm really ever going to know the answer to it. It's one of the things about the UFO subject. Unfortunately, we can have things that are confirmable, things that we can prove to be nonsense, and then there's this middle ground of information that is not, it doesn't amend itself well to proving or disproving, unfortunately. So, were there any other questions, Trace, that you wanted me to? There's a few others I'm looking at here, but if you want to jump in, there's one from Kit, one of our members.
Yeah.
Axis in ufology through decades. And I think what he means is, I'll just read here. It says, in the early days, This was a field driven entirely by hard evidence, he says. But then as we began to admit the reality of UFOs, we began to ask questions about their pilots, about their creators and civilizations of origin, he says. So he wonders, did this have the inevitable consequence of softening the UFO research or evidence scene? And how has it now, he says, has it now gone too far with the wild stories we're hearing at conferences like Contact in the Desert, which we just were at? I like this question. So I would say, has the UFO evidence become softened? I would say sort of yes and a little bit no. And what I mean is there's always been this side of the UFO phenomenon. So you go back to the 1950s and they had the contactees, people like George Adamski, people like lesser known individual contactees. Howard and Connie Menger were very well-known contactees of the 50s, and there were so many others who would have stories, and that's really all they were stories, because there's no evidence of contact with extraterrestrials. Back at that time, they were usually beautiful, human, male, female, who would have messages for them. And the messages were always the same. They were always to do with atomic weapons are dangerous, humanity needs to chill out on the atomic weapons. None of them in the 1950s were environmental, by the way. None. I'm not aware of any. That happened later. And you can really see how these claims follow cultural interests. The book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson is really the book that kickstarted the environmental movement. And I'm trying to think when she published that, but it was the very early 1960s, I believe. So there was really not any major environmental consciousness in the 50s. And as a result, none of the contactees received environmental messages from these extraterrestrials. Anyway, my point is, there's always been unverified claims that have littered or, followed ufology through the decades. All right. I would say that it's possibly more now than it was then. It's hard for me to quantify this, but it is my sense that I think one of the things that's happened is what Dave's speculation, I think, is valid in that, when we start asking questions about these people, pardon me, did that sort of make us jump ahead of, ahead of boring things like collecting evidence? And we want to know more and more and more and more. And our curiosity is like, well, what's their civilization like? And what's this like? And what's that like? And there's always going to be people coming in to attempt to answer these questions for you. I think part of it also has to do with the reality of UFO conferences in general. In other words, conferences in the UFO field have not really, they haven't gone throughout the history of UFO research. There were conferences in the 50s. They were all contactee conferences, as a matter of fact. But when you start getting into what we would call modern conference culture, like MUFON or like any of these other organizations that had conferences, that phenomenon did not really begin until the late 70s, early 1980s. And back in those days, in conferences in the 1980s, in North America, there might be 2 or 3 or 5 in a year that one could go to. Now it's like every week. Somewhere in North America, there's a big conference relating to UFOs that people can go to. It's just ubiquitous now. And what that has done is created what I sometimes call a conference culture. And what that has done, I have seen this. There's a great deal of pressure on presenters to provide information that becomes rather sensationalistic by its nature. The pressure's always there. It's something that I have always sought to avoid, and I don't know if I've succeeded. I've tried to avoid it, but I do know it's an ever-present danger because you want to get people to listen to you, right? And you want to get attention at the conferences, and people want to get YouTube hits. And so what they discover is that, and by the way, YouTube is a very big promoter of this type of culture because it really goes to the common denominator, the lowest common denominator. The fact is that what we have discovered is that there are lots and lots of people in this world who, turns out, don't care a whole lot about evidence. don't care a whole lot about rigorous methodologies in understanding what is true and what is not true. That's the fact. I've had to learn this fact. I've seen it in the 20 years that I have been a public person in the UFO field. It's funny, when I began my research in the 1990s, I had no understanding of this fact. I jumped into the UFO field after writing a very, very thick book, very well footnoted, and I thought this will impress people. Well, I guess some people thought it was really helpful, and others, I don't think they really cared. There are individuals who simply want answers, and they're not particularly, they're not particular in some cases about how those answers are derived. If it's from a person who seems like they have a good heart, if it's from a person who seems like they're being truthful, that's often good enough for a lot of people. It's not good enough for me. I hope it's not good enough for you, because the fact is that our world and history is filled with individuals who sound like they're telling you the truth and who aren't telling the truth. That's the reality. So I think that there is a lot of that that's crept in to the UFO field. So I guess I'll attribute it, because I'm really thinking of this for the first time. So to conferences, to YouTube. YouTube is a huge influence on all of this. And to the kind of explosion of this field over the last generation. And really, the study of UFOs has exploded. But in ways that longtime researchers, I think, have been caught off guard by. So I guess I would say that there's a lot of truth in what you're implying here, Dave. Good question. Any other questions? I don't know how we're doing with time. We've been going for about 45 minutes. I'm happy to continue. What do you think, Tracy?
I think we're still okay. So
we're still okay.
Let's just keep it going a little bit longer.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
You had another question here.
Yes. All right. Mr. Dolan, I recently heard an older Fade to Black with you, and you briefly mentioned the many counterculture figures like Jim Morrison and Neil Young. Can you comment on that?
Oh, wow. I did that on Fade to Black. Interesting. Absolutely. Well, in that case, I was probably referring to the research of the late Dave McGowan. Dave McGowan, I never met him. I never spoke with him. But he was an important influence on my thinking in certain ways. So Dave McGowan wrote a number of things, but one had to do with the birth of the hippie generation. And he has a very long titled article on the web called The Strange But Mostly True Story of Laurel Canyon and the Birth of the Hippie Generation. I highly recommend this. I think he did some excellent research, as far as I can tell. And what he essentially argued is that a portion, anyway, of the hippie generation seems to have been created by U.S. intelligence. And his thesis is too long to go into here. I would just direct you to his writings. But Jim Morrison, for example, who was the son of a U.S. Navy admiral, not just any old admiral, by the way, but the admiral who was running the U.S. fleet in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, when the United States foisted that lie upon the world about being attacked in an unprovoked fashion on the high seas, which escalated the Vietnam War. That Jim Morrison, he was the son of that admiral. Now, does that mean anything? Well, maybe it doesn't. But what McGowan did is he put together a list of a lot of the prominent rock stars of the 60s and pointed out how they sort of descended upon Laurel Canyon at that particular time, and how there was a very active U.S. naval intelligence presence in Laurel Canyon at that time. His supposition in the argument that he wrote was simply that it looked like the hippie generation in part was a creation by naval intelligence and CIA to derail the then active peace movement as it was spreading across the U.S., to focus people not on political activism so much as sex and drugs and rock and roll, and the explosion of LSD. Yes, LSD had been in the hands of U.S. intelligence before then, but it really exploded out of the Laurel Canyon scene in the mid-1960s, where it really became a thing. So those are part of his arguments, and undoubtedly, if I mentioned it on Fade to Black, that's why I mentioned it. Well, let me just follow up. I would have mentioned it with reference to what is going on in our world today. And I probably would have mentioned it in connection with elements of the New Age movement. Because I do look at the hippie movement of the 60s as having a lot of things in common with New Age, what we can call New Age ideology of today. And this is not to say that all hippies were creations of the CIA or that all New Age ideologues are creations of the intelligence community. I'm not saying that. There are, perfectly valid reasons that a person can hold to those philosophies, whether you agree with it or not. But I think there is a real consideration here that, a portion of what we call the New Age movement has connections to U.S. intelligence as a form of manipulation. Particularly, I think the single most dangerous element of New Age ideology, actually there's a few. One is this seems to me a lack of desire for evidence-based opinions. So if you feel something in your heart chakra, and I realize that sounds a little over the top, but there are people who will talk like this, then it must be true. In other words, truth has some subjective entity. I'm here to tell you, truth is not a subjective entity. Truth is real, and truth exists independently of whatever you think it is. This is why people argue about things all the time. They argue about 9/11. Why else would they argue about 9/11 if there wasn't this understanding that something happened there and we're not getting the truth, or about anything else that you can imagine? Truth is a real thing, and there's a dangerous erosion of this philosophy about truth that you get within elements of New Age ideology. And the other problem, as I see it with New Age ideology, is simply this excessive focus on inward looking. It doesn't mean that you don't look at yourself and that you don't seek within to become the best person you can be. Obviously, we want to do that. But it's also, there's also this tendency within that culture to go into your own truth and not to look out at negativity that's in this world, because by looking at negativity, you thereby give it power. And what that can easily do is cause a kind of tunnel vision and an insular bubble effect that is really dangerous. Because the fact is, as I often will tell people, there's a war going on out there. It's real. It's not going to go away simply because you want to live in your bubble and create your own positive reality. Wars mean that there are those out there who want to do harm to you. They do exist. And so we have a choice to make. We either work together and to learn the ugly truth about what's going on in this world, to deal with it, and sometimes to fight it, or we can avoid it. So I think this is why I think the New Age ideology, to some extent, can be considered, or at least treated, as a potential creation of intelligence community operations, because it really does sort of take us off our game to some extent. That's all I'll say about that for now.
Okay, here's an interesting question for you. So, what are your, I don't know if you're aware of this, what are your thoughts about Dr. Greer claiming that all cattle mutilations are nothing more than just black ops and are not alien related? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I would strongly disagree with that. There are too many mutilation cases that we would have to connect to real high strangeness for me to side with that. Now, I will say, I had a conversation with Gabe Valdez. I mean, that's Gabe Valdez was a former Mexico highway patrolman, state trooper, who was a real expert in cattle mutilations. He reported and investigated a lot of the cattle mutilation cases in New Mexico. And I chatted with him. He's deceased now, unfortunately. And he would not give me his exact position. He was very close to the vest on this. But he did seem to believe that a lot of those mutilations were the work of some kind of black ops program, which is essentially what Stephen Greer apparently has said. The question, however, is are all of them? And I think so. I think that some of these cases were found, some of these cattle were found in situations that are not consistent with that thesis at all. Where cattle were found in there's one case, a cattle's found in a locked shed lifted up on a shelf, a dead cow on a shelf, or a cow found in a field with no tracks, with no blood, with surgical incisions going back in the 1970s that are so precise that according to microscopic analysis, where incisions were made between the cell walls of the animal itself with that fine a laser. And I don't even know how that's possible, but this is what the analyses in the 1970s were saying. So I think, no, I would like to see a little more evidence, and I would like to see reasons why anyone would argue all of these are black ops. I mean, it seems to me that there's an ideological there's an ideological reason why someone would say this, and that's if they want to argue that all extraterrestrials are good. So if you're going to argue that all extraterrestrials are good or benevolent, then my goodness, why would they do such awful things as cattle mutilations? But if you disabuse yourself of that ideological assumption, you can free yourself into looking at some of the evidence. And I think some of the evidence points to the fact that this is beyond a human capability or human action. That's my opinion at this time. End of the hour, and we're probably going to wrap this up. Unless I'm wrong.
I will just check with the team and see how we're doing, but in the meantime, I'm going to give you another question. And I want to thank Dr. Gawker for his super chat. And he has a question that was actually asked in Toronto at the
You're
conference.
making the camera move.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry about that. A question that you were asked at the conference, in Vancouver. If you ever in key and could only ask one question to them, what would that be?
Oh, I was asked that question. So I've never encountered an ET that I'm aware of, and if I were to be in that position, the answer that I gave at that conference, it was off the cuff, and I hadn't really thought it out. But I said I would like to know, what is your kind of highest philosophy? In other words, it's very easy for us to discount our own capabilities when we think of these other advanced beings that presumably are interacting with us. We have this idea that they're all more advanced than us. And, I don't really know that that's true. I think they're undoubtedly more advanced than us in certain ways, but maybe not in other ways. Are they more advanced than us in emotional intelligence? Are they more advanced than us in social intelligence? Are they more advanced than us in music? Are they more advanced than us in representational art or abstract art? I don't know. Maybe they're not. What I would like to know, if I were to meet any extraterrestrial, is what is your personal philosophy of living? What to you constitutes the good? What to you constitutes virtue? I would want to know that. Because if I'm ever going to have a relationship with any other being, human or otherwise, I'm going to want to get that settled first. What are your ethics? What's your morality? What's your philosophy? Beyond that, we can talk about science. We can talk about quantum entanglement. We can talk about the cosmos. But my first thing is I want to know what you believe is the good in this world. And we'll have a couple of beers, glasses of wine, or whatever you like to have to relax, and we'll talk about that all night.
Okay, so we're going to start wrapping it up here, but I just want to say one thing quickly. When you were talking about YouTube being the lowest common denominator, you're more meaning people posting stuff on YouTube that's non-evidence based. That was what you were.
Well, yeah, I'm not demeaning anyone watching my YouTube videos. What I'm talking about are YouTube as a phenomenon. YouTube has exploded now for more than 10 years. and it's completely transformed so many fields, and it has transformed ufology. The way it's done that is it's made it more visual. It's made it more talky, less ready. So people aren't reading, they're listening. And that has an effect on the nature of evidence. It has an effect on what becomes popular and what's not popular. You know, it has a major effect on that. So that's what I'm saying. YouTube is an unbelievable human invention when you really think about it. I mean, everything that you want to know is practically on YouTube. If you want to learn anything about UFOs or how to gap a spark plug or anything else, you could pull up a YouTube video and you can learn about it. So it's an unbelievable library of human knowledge in video form. It's incredible. But it also does transform the nature of the culture of the UFO phenomenon. And that's really what I meant.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's basically it.
Thank you. Let's thank everybody, and let's just talk about our calendar and where they can find us and what you're working on, what's upcoming.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if anyone is interested in my calendar of events, I would encourage them to go to richarddolanmembers.com. So on that website, there's one tab that just says events. You just click it, and Tracy keeps it completely up to date all the time. And that will always tell you anything that I'm on the schedule for doing. That includes my weekly radio shows. That included this live chat, and that includes conferences as well, wherever they happen to be. There is one event on our calendar coming up, and that is in mid-September.
Yep, that is. It's called True Legends. It's a different kind of conference for you. It's transhumanism in the hybrid age. And that is September 14th through September 16th. And the cool thing about that one is that people are going...
Come on down here.
Hi.
Okay. Yes.
The cool thing about this conference is it's available for live stream. So it's quite a large conference. It's in Missouri. I think it'll be very interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I'm developing a presentation for that event on the relationship of transhumanism to the UFO subject in general. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm really looking forward to working through some fresh thinking on this subject. Right. So we've got that. Anything else we need to wrap up with?
No, just want to say again that on Richard Dolan Members, just because it's called that, we want everybody to know that there is a free section that you can go to. The calendar is always free. There's always a free section, and then of course there's the member section, and you can kind of look around and see what's there.
Yeah, there's a lot of free content. So and members content. I'm actually shocked. I'm completely shocked at the amount of work that I've been doing this year in 2018. I thought I could kick back and take it easy. I'm working more than I've ever worked before, and a lot of it is on this website. So if you're interested in anything that I'm doing or anything that I have to say, that is the place to be. It's richarddolanmembers.com. Absolutely, you want to go there.
Books and TV appearances, quickly. Someone's been asking that repeatedly.
Well, TV, gosh, I don't know. I just did I'm on Ancient Aliens, so you can...
He's back on Ancient Aliens.
Take a look at that. And I don't know, is there anything else that I've...
Working on the False Flag book. That's something that's in the works.
Yeah. I'm working on the False Flag book, which is some of that came out in the series that I created for Gaia TV. I would encourage you to take a look at that. And one thing that I'll probably do this year before the year is out is put out a couple of booklets on some subjects of interest. So by booklet, we're talking 90, 100-page long on a couple of different subjects. I can leave it at that. UFOs and the media is definitely one. And then theories of what these other beings are, from extraterrestrial to interdimensional and beyond. I think I've got a booklet on that, and perhaps one or two others. So got a lot of writing projects in the works.
Great. We just want to thank everybody so much. We know there's so many questions that we couldn't get to. There were so many cool questions in there, and hopefully we can save some of them and get back to them. Thank you so much for everybody, from us to everybody, for joining and showing your support. And thank you for the super chats. And it was great to be here with all of you. And we want to thank Michael and Lori for helping us out and chatting with you all. So
Absolutely.
that's it.
Thank you, everyone. You're going to need to turn that off. Do you mind?
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
We'll be back. Before Tracy turns this off, I just want everyone to know this is a regular feature now. We're going to try to do this on a weekly basis. So just subscribe to the channel. I would strongly encourage you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and you will get updates as they. And the other reason to subscribe to the channel, incidentally, is it's really simple. We're putting up a huge amount of content beyond these live chats. There's much, much more that's going up these days. And so if you care about anything that I'm up to, by subscribing, you'll get notifications to check out whatever new videos are put up on the Richard Dolan channel. So with that, I want to thank everyone very, very much. Thanks to Tracy, Lori, and Michael, and all of the listeners. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.